Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, my dear brothers, sisters, friends, and the foes out there, and welcome to another episode of the Blood Brothers podcast with your host, Dilly Hussain. Before I introduce today's guest, I want to remind all the avid podcast listeners that you can find this episode on all 4 seasons on all the major audio platforms. And if you're tuning in via YouTube, don't be cheeky. Remember to click subscribe to the 5 Pillars YouTube channel. Today's guest requires no introduction. He is a dear brother, a friend, the co-founder of 5 Pillars, the editor-in-chief, Roshan Muhammed Salih.
Assalamu alaikum, Dilly.
How are you doing?
Yeah, alhamdulillah. I've got a lot to talk about today, I think.
We do
indeed. I'm a bit angry, even, and I think some of that anger is going to come out in this podcast.
I dragged you in on New Year's Day to have this conversation, but let's not rush it because there is lots to talk about. And we've entered 2025 with a very eventful 2024. The revolution in Bangladesh, and of course the toppling of Bashar, I think, were the 2 highlights of 2024, as well as the continuation of the horrific genocide in Gaza and the death and destruction which continues on an industrial scale. But we go into 2025 with Syria as the hottest story. Would you agree?
Oh yeah, at the moment. Yeah. That's our focus as well.
Of course. Yeah. And my recent trip, our previous positions, our current positions, critics, and all kinds of things related to Syria has kind of been boiling up, I would say, in the last 2 weeks or so, especially in recent days. So I thought, let's have a podcast. Let's kick off the Gregorian year as 2025. We're talking about Syria. And we'll kind of end with conclusions and predictions and feelings for the region in general. How do you feel about that?
I think we have to talk about it. I mean, we did put Syria to bed for many years, didn't we? Because I remember at the beginning of 5 Pillars in 2013, for the first few years, Syria was raging, maybe 3 or 4 years. And we had a lot of differences. And I think, alhamdulillah, we've worked really well together for 11 years. But if we have had points of differences where we've even not spoken to each other for a few days because we've had angry voice note exchanges on WhatsApp and phone calls and whatever, it's because of Syria. And between 2017 and until recently, because the war was largely settled and Bashar had the ascendancy, we didn't have those conversations. But in that time, I think I've moved my position more than you have. You probably haven't moved your position at all. But now Syria it's blown up again. Online, obviously on the ground, online. And now everyone's talking about it. Everyone's hurling accusations, slanderous accusations, flying left, right, and centre. So that's why I think we have to do this podcast.
And of course, we've chosen it to happen on our platform and on our terms because the type of immature and, quite frankly, slanderous inquisition that's been taking place by some quarters of the pro-Palestine voice on X particularly has been a serious cause for concern. More so because these individuals with sizable followings, and there's not many of them, we will discuss some of these individuals later, themselves have nefarious backgrounds and associations and positions. And I think that's an important conversation. But look, let's frame the Syrian revolution from the story of the Arab Spring, right? Were you excited when Arab Spring kicked off?
Yes, I thought it was, probably naively now, I thought it was like going to be the end of American empire.
Why naively?
Well, obviously we look back on it and a lot's gone wrong and there's a lot of people died and countries haven't. I mean, obviously kicked off in Tunisia and now we have a situation where one dictator was overthrown in Tunisia and we effectively have another dictator who's not that much different from Ben Ali. So Tunisia's gone full circle. And the Islamists there have been very much sidelined.
Egypt?
Ghanouchi is in jail, etc. Egypt, obviously the Muslim Brotherhood had 1 year in power, and then Sisi was Mubarak Mark II. So we have a return to pro-Western, pro-Israel dictatorship in Egypt.
Libya.
Libya has turned into a militia kind of war with 2 or 3 governments all at odds with each other, a split country effectively, and not a place that anyone would consider a model.
Yemen.
Yemen has gone through, obviously you had Ali Abdullah Salih in power, pro-West, he was assassinated. Then you have the Houthis, obviously backed by Iran. Part of the resistance axis still fighting Israel, along with Hamas when everyone else has kind of surrendered. So that's Yemen. So obviously Yemen's still a very divided country.
Bahrain?
Bahrain, obviously, there was a mainly Shia-backed revolution, which was actually oppressed by I know they're Sunnis, but I'm no fan of the Bahraini dictators. They're pro-West, they're pro-Israel, they've normalized with Israel. So you have a situation there which it's majority Shia. You did have an uprising there which was cracked down upon quite harshly, I think. But that's one revolution that wasn't allowed to succeed.
Lastly, Syria.
Syria was a bloody war, kind of 600,000 people dead at least, millions of refugees. So it's probably the worst case scenario from the Arab Spring.
And why do you believe, I'll explain why I believe it was, but why do you believe Syria stood out or was unique compared to the others? Because as you rightly highlight, things were kind of went back to a type of status quo in Tunisia. Right, the kind of power sharing efforts of the Islamists, because not even Ennahda describe themselves as that anymore. Look at the situation they found themselves in because of the pragmatism. Muhammad Morsi, rahimahullah, and the Ikhwan al-Muslimin in Egypt, how they were treated straight after Morsi's removal and Rabal Adawi and so forth. Libya, after removal of Gaddafi, after a NATO no-fly zone intervention, quickly went into, as you rightly mentioned, a kind of very split and divided, balkanized Libya with militia war leaders and warlords. But Syria was unique. Syria was unique because quite quickly, at least the way I observed it, quite quickly, foreign players got involved.
Yeah.
Quite quickly, there was a very dominant Islamic undercurrent to the revolution, right? Egypt was mixed. It wasn't entirely led by the Islamists. It wasn't entirely, nor was the case in Tunisia. Maybe in Libya it was a bit more apparent. But with Syria, there was a very strong Islamic undercurrent. There was this kind of feeling that the Sunni majority were wronged. We can't take away that. We can't take that away from the Syrian masses. That's how they felt under 54 years of Bashar. There was a lot of foreigners from both sides, whether it was fighters coming from via Turkey from around the world, or whether it was Iranian militias, Hezbollah, Iraqis, Afghan and Pakistani mercenaries. There was foreigners there involved in all various shapes and forms. Why do you think Syria was as complex as it was compared to the other revolutions?
I think simply because of the geography of Syria as a key state. So Libya is a bit out on a limb there, and it's not a pivotal state in the Arab or Muslim world, whereas Syria is right in the heart of that geography, surrounded by Israel, Iran, Iraq, Lebanon, Turkey. So it's the geography of Israel. Obviously, we have the Islamic element and the hadiths. We can go into that if you want to. But looking at a purely secular perspective, because of the geography, the key real estate that Syria occupied, it attracted various players. And the bewildering interplay of players that even I don't still understand now. It's even confusing to me after someone who looks at it quite closely. But you have the West. You have Russia. So you have that superpower rivalry interested in Syria. Then at a more regional level, you have Turkey versus Iran. And also you have the Gulf countries, and then Israel there on the sidelines as well, all interested in what's happening in Syria. Then on the ground, you have Bashar versus the rebels. On Bashar's side, you have the Alawites, who are kafir, basically. And you have Christians, minorities. Then you have Druze, Christians. Then you have secular Sunnis. And then opposing him, you also have secular Sunnis, but also religious Sunnis, etc. So it was a bewildering interplay and spider's web of actors on the ground, in the region, and internationally as well.
And because of that complexity, I think Syria needs to be dealt with very sensitively because of all those different plays. Even when I, in my joy and in my solidarity with the Syrians, sometimes you can lose nuance. But there's also a reality that we shouldn't downplay. And I think that if a rational conversation cannot begin with that Bashar al-Assad and his father and the regime that they oversaw was not desirable or good for majority of Syrians. If we can't start from that conversation, I find that you will never find common ground at all.
Yeah, I do start from that premise that that regime was evil. And also, if you're a believing and practicing Muslim, you can't have a kafir running a Muslim country. Simple as that.
And an Alawite was exactly what it was.
Alawites are kafir, right? They are non-Muslims.
He lobbied Iran and the religious leaders, his father Hafiz al-Assad, for them to regard Alawites as Shia Muslims.
Even the Shias, traditionally and for centuries, have regarded the Alawites as non-Muslims, as kafir. They only began to change that rhetoric because of political convenience.
In Syria.
Because of the political alliance between Iran and Syria since the 1980s, because Syria was one of the few countries, or perhaps the only country, that supported Iran during that Iran-Iraq war. Yeah.
And you know, when Syria kicked off, it was the early years of Five Pillars. And we kind of had our set positions. I remember we had that kind of written to and fro. Reasons why foreigners should not fight in Syria. Do you remember that very early article? And I just felt at the time that Syria was no different in principle, but here was a popular uprising, which was born out of the killing of a 13-year-old lad called a brother, may Allah accept him as a shaheed, Hamza al-Khatib in Dara. He was kidnapped, tortured, stabbed, electrocuted, and his body was then thrown out to collect. People in Dara rose up. There were mass defections. But it was no different in a popular uprising that wanted the removal or change of an oppressive system, which we saw in Tunisia, Egypt, Yemen, Bahrain, Libya, elsewhere. By the way, which countries did you visit during the Arab Spring, for our viewers and listeners?
Libya, twice, both the East and the West. Egypt, Gaza, Tunisia. I didn't go to Syria. I went to Syria during the 2006 war.
Yemen?
I've been to Yemen, but not during the war. So it was those countries mainly.
So Arab Spring, you basically did Egypt, Tunisia, and Libya.
Yes, so those are the main countries.
Yes, that's like 3 out of 6, 3 out of 7. You've had on the ground, on the field experience and exposure, especially with in Libya. I know. So, on that principle, I saw it no different to other uprisings during the Arab Spring. That this was a popular uprising of people who want to remove an oppressive regime, right? So Syria wasn't that different in comparison to that, but because of those reasons that we mentioned, it was very complex. And my general position was mostly, if not entirely, supportive of the revolution. That Bashar was an evil regime, a tyrannical regime with a unique hostility to normative Sunni Orthodox Islam. And whilst I'm not going to overplay that sectarian card, because that's also quite problematic, it takes away other issues of the regime, but it was certainly there, and that's the position I generally maintained, whereas yours was very different, wasn't it?
Yeah, so at the beginning, so I've been on a bit of a journey. At the beginning, I was against overthrowing Bashar not because I loved him, but because I thought it would lead to a civil war, which no one would win and everyone would lose, and also because I felt it was bad for the Palestinians, because, like it or not, and we'll discuss this later, there was that transit route from Iran to Hezbollah, and while Iran wasn't fighting Israel, Hezbollah were, you know. So those are my two reasons. I just didn't think the rebels could win. And I'm someone I'm someone who doesn't really believe in overthrowing regimes unless you can do it. So, for example, I'm against the Saudi regime. I detest this Saudi regime. But would I call for an armed uprising against MBS? I wouldn't, because I just think it would lead to chaos and war, and no one would win, everyone would be weakened. So that was my reasoning. Condemn me for it, but that's being honest. That was my reasoning. Not because I loved Bashar, not because the Iranians were telling me what to say, whatever, but from purely practical purposes, I thought it would be a disaster, and it did turn out to be a disaster.
Did you support the removal of Mubarak?
Yes, I did. Yes.
Gaddafi?
Gaddafi, I did at the beginning. Yes, I thought it was. I thought these were kind of. I mean, Gaddafi was more nuanced. I think Mubarak was a pro-Western dictator. You know, and he was someone who was pro-Israel, you know, effectively pro-West, and I loved seeing pro-Western dictators being taken down. So even now, I would like to see, you know, King Abdullah of Jordan, in the right circumstances, him being overthrown. I would love to see Sisi being overthrown in the right circumstances. Not if it's going to lead to 10 million deaths, you know. But Gaddafi was someone who was more nuanced. He's a bit like Bashar. On certain things, he was pro-West. On certain things, he was anti-West. His biggest mistake was giving up his nuclear program, because as soon as he did that, the West attacked. And obviously, he had this gold dinar. He wanted to kind of detach Libya and all of Africa from the US dollar. So as soon as that happens, you die.
Do you accept that he's a dictator?
But he was a secular, brutal dictator, absolutely.
Who literally created a system in Libya where one family member had a spy for
it was a family.
Tortured, jailed.
Family dictatorship, yeah, absolutely.
So look, these people, I don't think are the right representations of Islam or Islamic leadership.
Absolutely not.
Or even the aspirations of the region.
Yeah.
Many of the cases, these Arab dictators initially came via popular military coups where they were seen as liberators, anti-imperialist vanguards, people who would bring change and prosperity and autonomy to the region. They were the very early military coups in the Arab world during the Cold War. Many of them were seen as popular leaders at the time, including Gamal Abdel Nasser and others. But here we are with Syria. And when did your position start changing then? Because mine didn't. For me, it was more to do with the fact that
I just think that the Bashar's regime was unsustainable, and the level of killing, and the Israeli type tactics of just bombing civilian areas and hospitals and whatever. If we say that 600,000 people were killed during that war, then Bashar is responsible for at least 400,000 of them. So he did the vast majority of the killing and the blood on his hands. No doubt about that. So I think it was also. I have been on a spiritual journey as well. When I started Five Pillars, I was a Sunni Muslim, of course, but I was a Sunni Muslim without a good knowledge of Sunni history and Shia history, and even the differences between the two, in terms of fiqh and whatever, Aqidah. Over the course of the 10 years, I've always been a Sunni Muslim, but I have become a much more convinced Sunni Muslim when it comes to our Aqidah, our history, etc., etc. And I've moved. I was never in the Shia camp because I've never believed. Believed in the. This is why people accuse me of being a secret Shia. Yeah. Anyone that knows me, you can testify that I've never been a secret Shia. However, politically, I was in the resistance axis camp, never religiously, but politically.
How did that then? Did it play a role in your taking your geopolitics? You becoming a more aware Sunni,
yes,
more awakened
it did.
Sunni.
It did definitely, and also, if the price of aligning myself politically with the resistance axis is abandoning my Sunni brethren, then the choice is very easy for me. I'll never abandon my Sunni brethren. As simple as that. And I still find, like you call, or I'll be very, very honest. There was a show called The Blessed Syrian Revolution that you appeared on 2 weeks ago. And I told the organizers of that conference, I wasn't actually invited on, but I did have discussions with the organizers. And I said, brothers, don't get me on this because I'm not down with it like you guys are down with it. I still have very big doubts about what's happening. It just seemed to happen too quickly. I feel as though there's a hidden hand behind this, whether it's a Turkish hand or an American hand or even an Israeli hand. I feel that Bashar giving up without a fight was just too convenient, given that these were towns and villages and cities that he defended tooth and nail.
Are you not convinced?
Existentially. And also the second thing is that I've never really been, I've always suspected Al-Qaeda linked groups of being infiltrated from early days. ISIS, Al-Qaeda linked groups. I just don't trust them. And I just feel that these groups are in the pockets of bigger powers. They're not independent actors on the ground. So for those two reasons, and because of the heavy investment of the West in overthrowing Bashar, or at least weakening him, literally the CIA and MI5 and others were pouring billions of pounds into a rebel victory in Syria. So this is not something I can ignore, and I don't think clued up, intelligent Muslims should ignore that. And I feel that some of the commentary around Syria is too simplified. It's like Bashar bad, rebels good. Alhamdulillah, this is a victory for Islam. I think this is a simplified narrative which doesn't reflect the reality on the ground.
Is there truth to that narrative?
There is truth, but there's truth to everything, and there's untruth to everything.
So what good could Bashar? Tell me about the good things that you think.
I don't think Bashar. I'm glad that Bashar has fallen. I'm glad he's gone, and I'm glad Syria can rebuild. This was an unsustainable regime. The Iranians should have done a deal with the rebels. Maybe in 2017 when they'd effectively won, when they had the ascendancy. They should have shown magnanimity and done a power sharing deal or something. But they were too arrogant to do that. They thought they'd won everything, and now they've lost everything.
So just to bounce off some of your points there, saying that Syria was a blessed revolution doesn't necessarily mean that everything that happened in that 13 years, or the things that may happen in the coming years, is blessed. I think the titling or the perception of Syria being the blessed revolution was the undeniable Islamic identity of the revolution. Number two, that from the various uprisings and revolutions in the Arab world, Syria showed signs that it wanted an Islamic future. Now, whether you agreed with that type of Islamic future, or who was holding that baton, or who was representing that cause, that's a legitimate discussion. I think even Syrians would have that discussion. That if there was a projection outside of Syria that is, what was happening here was for an Islamic objective, who were the poster boys for this call? Who were the representations and representatives of this cause? That's a legitimate debate to have. You're also correct that when you have armed groups or militias, whether they're transnational or local, like Al-Qaeda, ISIS, even though they differ in ideology, tactics and methodology as well, is that they can be infiltrated, because you're basically relying on external weapons and funding to a certain degree and to a significant degree in certain countries. That said, people change, organizations change, their directions change. Al-Nusra was there in 2013. HTS is here now in 2025. Most of the organization is built up of Syrian men. I think we also overplay that there was a gravitation of Syrians of wanting to express their Sunniism more in a Syria that would allow them to do that more, as opposed to a hostile, oppressive minority of Alawites occupying the highest positions in the judiciary, in the mukhabarat, in the army, in all these key positions, in educational institutions. And the people of Syria wanted to breathe. That those who wanted to breathe weren't always Islamic. There were secular Sunnis, there were non-Muslim Syrians that wanted the end of Bashar. And I felt that my consistency in supporting that revolution on the principle, whether you can argue that it's simplified or not, is that he was a tyrant, he was a taghut, he was someone who oppressed mainly Sunni Muslims, but as well as Alawites, Druze and Christians who didn't comply with his regime's requirements and his father's regime. And on that principle, I felt that it was enough for to be supportive of that, right?
You see, many things can be true at the same time, can't they? This is why Muslims and non-Muslims can think very simply in black and white terms. But, yes, Bashar was a taghut. But yes, the rebels were backed by countries that didn't have the best interests of the Ummah at heart.
They didn't even have the best interests of the rebels at heart.
No?
They didn't even have the best interests of rebels at the heart. I mean, I know now there's a queuing up of Arab diplomats and leaders and foreign ministers to meet Ahmed Alsharaa. Yeah, I know we're seeing it. It's non-stop. It's been relentless, especially the GCC countries, Saudi especially, and so forth. So, but it was very different just 6 to 8 months ago, Roshan.
Oh, yeah.
Where they were welcoming Assad, where they were reintegrating.
They thought Assad had won, they were welcomed back into the fold.
Yes, and there's even some rumours that we've heard on the ground. There's certainly whispers, but they're not going to amplify this, is that the rebels were told that this was a lost cause.
Yes,
that you
I believe that.
Yeah,
I believe they were told that.
You need to give up this fight.
Things changed because obviously Iran severely weakened, Hezbollah severely weakened, Russia stretched in Ukraine. So ultimately, if you're leaving aside what I said about Bashar being a kafir.
No, but you said about timing. You said about timing. The rebels didn't even make a secret about the timing. They were very open. Yeah. Hezbollah's weak, Russia's weak, Iran, this is the time to strike. And the other side would be like, oh, you had no other priorities except to overthrow Bashar whilst Gaza's happening. they'll be like, well, what other time did you want us to do it? What other time do you want us to do it when the guys that we see as our oppressors and occupiers are weakened, severely weakened?
I've said this on Muslims Uncensored a few weeks ago. I don't think I've changed position really. I'm happy Bashar is gone.
Yeah.
I'm happy that the Syrian people are ending this regime and they can breathe a little bit and there's hope for the future. I am concerned at some of the statements coming out from the HTS leadership about Israel. I think that they are testing public opinion, and I think it's incumbent on us to be quite harsh on them about Israel, because I feel quite strongly that they could be, if unchecked, on a path to normalization with Israel, and they will justify it on the grounds that Syria is a destroyed country and they have to focus on rebuilding Syria. I feel that they will do this if they are not checked very strongly by the Ummah. And I also feel very sorry for the Palestinians, because like it or not, and we've cussed Bashar, and please nobody say I'm a Bashar supporter, but he did allow that transit route from this. Facts are facts. He allowed a transit route.
How valuable do you think that transit route was?
I think it was important because obviously
for who?
Hezbollah, because Hezbollah have been chucking missiles at Israel for the past year, and they fought Israel previously, 20 years before that. So it was a crucial transit route, and now that transit route is over. So you could plausibly say that, all right, you could say Iran didn't fight very well, or Hezbollah didn't fight very well, but they fought. Okay? Now
in a very limited way.
But they fought. Okay.
Yeah, of course.
Did any Sunni Arab countries fight?
No, but they have fought wars before.
In the past.
Yeah, and we shouldn't write that off.
I will forget because I'm getting old now.
I'll remind you. I'll remind you. When you forget.
Yeah. So now Syria is completely out of the game. It might have had only one foot in before, but it's completely out of the game.
For now.
For now.
Look, the axes of resistance have been severely weakened. Hassan Nasrallah, one of the key, figureheads of this axis, has been taken out. There was successive leadership that were assassinated days after his killing.
Yeah.
We had the beeper pager attack. We had the ceasefire that was signed in early December, and day after Operation Deterring Aggression was launched. We've had Iranian targets, hit in Iran. We had Ismail Haniyeh assassinated in Iran. We had Iranian officials and the Iranian embassy and consulate attacked in Damascus. It's received a severe blow.
Absolutely.
And it can be argued, not necessarily the truth, that this could be the beginning of the end of the axis of resistance led by Iran. It could be. Depends on how it recovers.
I think that's a plausible suggestion.
It depends on how it recovers. Depends on how it rebuilds its relations with countries surrounding it. So that's the reality we're dealing with. Now, with regards to how it relates to 5 pillars, is that we went out to Syria. And we went out there pretty much within a week or 10 days. And I managed to speak to HTS officials, like other news outlets did. I managed to be in a close press briefing and meeting and Q&A with Ahmed Alsharaa.
So let me ask you about that now.
Right, go for
it. Because obviously on Twitter, we have people saying that you got that interview with Ahmed Alsharaa because MI5 set it up for you.
Yeah.
Are you not telling me something here, Dilly?
I think that claim is so outrageous and slanderous. And anyone who knows 5 pillars and knows both of us, our work in the course of the last 11 years, or the fact that not too long ago I had the police knocking on my door, 2 police detectives, because the Zionists created a pylon about how I was supporting anti-Semitic pogroms. You've done a documentary whilst you were at Press TV exposing the MI5.
So how did you get that interview then?
It's very easy to understand how I got that interview. The same way that anyone else got the interview, there is a process. And also, let's just talk about the whole thing, because I've done it 5-6 times in other podcasts, but let's just do it here so it's on record. It's very easy to get to Syria. Very easy. You can go via Turkey and wait for your paperwork to be approved, or you can just go to Beirut and drive to the Munster crossing and just cross. You get a stamp and that's it. If you have press credentials or you're with an NGO, it'll be easier than if you were just your average Joe blog. Boom, done. Everyone knows that's how you get there. Secondly, we're not amateurs here. we have contacts. You have contacts. I have contacts. We have contacts within the mainstream. We have people that we've built relationships with over the years. And I found out that everyone is gathering in Damascus in one of the two hotels, in Sheraton or the Four Seasons. So if you're going to be in Damascus and you want to, that's the place to be, right? And it was swarming
with journalists.
With journalists. And I'm very sure other nefarious individuals who have come on behalf of their governments to gather into it, to spy and all sorts. Yeah. But basically, Damascus was buzzing. It was buzzing. It was swarming with international press from all continents. They were all there, and if you were anyone of any significance, you were either in the Sheraton or at the Four Seasons. And I was at the Sheraton. And I had a friend from the Associated Press called. I had other friends, and she was someone who I recently met through a mutual contact. And there were other people that recognize you, and you recognize them because, like, oh, this is the guy who writes for the Middle East correspondent for the Times and so forth. People know Five Pillars. We've been around for 11 years. They've ran many stories against us. And naturally, you have officials linked to the transitional government in these same hotels. Yeah. And your fixers will arrange meetings with them. You have a coffee with them. You tell them who you're about, what you're about, and the publication or the channel that you work for, and you put in a request. Wallahi, that's literally how it is.
But why do you think they wanted a little old Five Pillars in the room? Because with the Associated Press, with the Times?
No, because I don't think we are as little as we'd like to project, and there is real grassroots work that we've done that has to be acknowledged.
When known, yeah. And I think they also probably wanted some Islamic legitimacy as well.
Yeah, for sure. From us. Or at the very least, an audience with the Western Muslims.
Yes.
Right? Something that the Associated Press will not do. Something that the Sunday Times will not do. Something which the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the France 24, even TRT and Al Jazeera cannot really entirely speak to the Western Muslim audience in the way that we can and we have, whether it be my recent trip to Afghanistan and the high ticket interviews there with Afghan officials, same with Bangladesh and speaking to Professor Muhammad Yunus's press secretary and having high level interviews there. So we have been there. We've been there wherever there's been a seismic change in the Muslim world, Bangladesh, Afghanistan and Syria most recently. We've been there. Yeah. It's not rocket science to basically, you have a fixer, you basically be present at the place where everything's happening. You have
one
meetings.
Thing leads to another.
Yeah, one thing leads to another. A conversation leads to another.
It's just journalistic work, basically.
100%. And they'll do, and of course they'll do their background checks. And for whatever reason, the transitional government of Syria at that time felt that it was appropriate among 6 other outlets for Five Pillars to be there. And I'm sure they had their reasons to do so. There's a reason why others weren't there. So it's not that hard. And there was no MI5 involved. A'udhu billah. Such a slanderous accusation. That's another thing. I can accept that coming from the likes of Dan Cohen, an anti-Zionist Jew whose work for Palestine I'm not going to downplay or dismiss because I'm just like that. Yeah. But for him to start this rumor in the way that he did has shown clear Zionist Hasbara tactics and methodologies. I'm not saying that's the way he is, but I'm saying the tactics that he employed. Because he found an old tweet from 2013, where basically I said, victory is near, hashtag Jabhat al-Nusra. And I explained, number one, I tweeted that when the group was not prescribed. And number two, I hashtagged the group because they were the ones that were leading the offensive. That could have been hashtag FSA.
Yeah, because they were trending at the time.
They were trending at the time. It could have been hashtag Ahrar al-Sham. It could have been hashtag SDF, YPG.
Or Bashar al-Assad.
Or Bashar. It could... Yeah. You just hashtag the group that's leading and trending the story. But yes, I perceived Bashar's downfall in 2013 as a victory for the Ummah. My position hasn't changed. To now take that and then carry out an inquisition where you're like, tell us which authorities and which secret services. Was it the Turks? Was it the CIA? That's pathetic. How dare you? Who even gives you that right? And on whose mandate are you even asking?
I think we're going to. What do you think of HTS then? I've outlined my doubts about them. What do you think about them?
So I believe Hayat Tahrir al-Sham as an organization is not the Jabhat al-Nusra of 2013 and 14. And anyone who accepts that take is very amateur in following the nuances of how certain rebel groups have evolved, have changed strategy, military strategy, religious strategy, that they've changed. And that's why Jabhat al-Nusra was there in 2013. And I called it early then. If you recall, I called it back then that these guys are going to remain in the Syrian scene for a while. Because for whatever reason, they were the most ferocious in battle. They had the least amount of leadership corruption from outside compared to, let's say, the Free Syrian Army, who were in Turkey, the de facto kind of exile government that were meeting Israeli officials, that were saying that, look, we're happy to make peace with Israel so long as Bashar goes. We didn't see that rhetoric from Jabhat al-Nusra and other Salafi Islamist jihadist groups. I called it back then that these guys, in whatever form, they're going to remain. In 2016 to 18, there was that kind of formal departure from Al-Qaeda, that we don't want a expansionist caliphate or emirate. Our focus is Syria. We're mainly made up of Syrian people. And there was this kind of like brand shift, a political shift, but they remained very influential in Idlib and in other parts of Syria. So they were always going to play some role in the future of Syria. What do I think of them now? It's hard to say, but there are things which are promising from the transitional government, and there are things which are understandably of concern. Israel remains, for me, the core issue where any type of normalization or involvement or collaboration in the further oppression of Palestinians is a red line. But I am of the position that we must give them time. And that there are certain unreasonable expectations that the Ummah has of the transitional government, and unreasonable and unjust to the Syrian people themselves. Now, whilst we can say 12 million displaced, 650,000 killed, 60 to 70% of the country decimated, sanctions, Israel making incursions from the south, literally occupying new Syrian territory. We have the SDF backed and funded by America. We have Iran playing sectarian games with the Alawites and the Christians. That's what they're dealing with. If people think it's just, whether you think that HTS are agents or that they are generally from the sons of the Ummah in Syria or somewhere in between, do you think it's reasonable in 18 days to demand that they should basically wage at least a rhetorical war against Israel? Number two, prioritize Israel over the internal lack of security that's happening from the Kurds and other loyalist groups that haven't been swept from Latakia and the coastal areas. All I'm saying is, let's be reasonable in our expectations before we write off a transitional government that's been here for 18 days, that's got huge issues at hand to deal with. And then let's also look at it pragmatically. That do we want the Syrians who have suffered for 13, 14 years to come back to rubble? Do we not want them to stand in their own 2 feet? Do we not want the rebuilding of Syria to even have some kind of hope that it could be something in the future?
I think two things I would say is, one, that I think Hamas and the Houthis have shown that you can be completely destroyed and still fight. So they're kind of putting everyone else to shame in terms of their willingness to fight and risk everything.
Hamas doesn't have a choice. It has to fight. Do you think Hamas has a choice?
You could argue that the Houthi, well, they could surrender. They could sign a deal. They could release hostages.
They haven't, yeah. And
but I would say, look, I actually don't expect HTS to fight Israel.
So what do you expect from them? As an editor of the Muslim News website, what do you expect from them?
I completely understand they're not in a position to fight Israel. I think their focus should be on rebuilding Syria. I do not expect them to go to war with Israel at all. But what I do expect from them is not to put out friendly signals towards Israel. Agreed. And that is what they've been doing. They have been doing it. They've been downplaying everything. They've been saying that the signals, and they're carefully calibrated, thought through signals. These are the words of politicians that have thought about what they're saying. And their audience is the West and, by extension, Israel. And they're sending out signals. We don't want to fight you. They're sending out no signals of solidarity towards the Palestinians at all. And they're not sending out any signals that in the future things might change. It's very, very disheartening, Dilly.
Yeah. So look, there was the whole issue about even publicly acknowledging what Israel was doing, which took them about nearly a week. Then there was the repetition of inaction, whilst prioritizing national unity, that simply going to war with Israel was not a priority. When I pressed Obaida Arnaut during my interview, he did voice solidarity. He goes, there's not a Muslim or an Arab that doesn't feel for the people of Palestine. But it reverts back to that whether a hostile approach to Israel is something which is strategically wise right now. Now, whether you believe that's giving out friendly signals or optimistically, they're just playing a particular audience for now because all eyes are on them, and that when the time is right, if the right kind of variables are there, things could shift. We simply don't know.
I also think that if they think that they can outmaneuver bigger regional and international powers, they're living in cloud cuckoo land.
How many times have smaller armies defeated bigger armies in IS history?
Well, they're not. This is politics we're talking about. They're not. They can't take on America. They can't take on.
No. But being in Cloud 9, we would have been accused of being in Cloud 9 if we told you that the Syrians would be, the rebels would be sick. The HGS and al-Julani would be sitting in Damascus 6 months ago. You'd think I was in Cloud 9.
Yeah, I didn't see it coming. Because circumstances change.
Yeah, exactly. So these things happen. So I wouldn't. All I'm saying is.
But that's not a plan, is it? That's
it's not a plan.
That's like throw the cards up in the air, see where they fall.
Definitely not. No, what I'm saying is that
it's wishful thinking, isn't it? Really,
the concerns are genuine, and certain red flags have been shown. But you can also see that they care enough to ensure that, for example, when the governor of Damascus says what he says, that there is at least an attempt to correct or assure the public.
Yeah, I appreciated that.
All that when Aleppo was taken, that there was a massive Palestine flag hanging from the citadel. Or that when I went to Syria myself, I saw with my own eyes from amongst the people that they see their struggle and the struggle of the Palestinians as one.
The people have always been the same, yeah.
They're the same people. They're Ahl al-Sham. They share the same lineage and tribes. They're literally the same people.
And I think about the West, kind of these Western delegations coming in really quickly. I think the same day as you went to see
the Brits. The
Brits were there, the Americans and the Germans. It just seems... Do you really think that none of this was planned before?
No, I don't. Look, I think to have such...
It's so quick. The acceptance of al-Julani and HTS is so quick.
Yeah, so I think that the reason why that's happening is because they realize that they don't have a choice but to deal with al-Julani. Remember, lest we forget that Bashar, at least from 2017 or 16 onwards, he was seen as the lesser evil. Yeah. He was seen as the guy that is better to have sitting in Damascus than these Syrian rebels that we don't entirely control. He became the lesser evil for the West. The West is there for three things primarily, Roshan. You know this. They are there for their geopolitical interests, they're for their economic interests, and they're basically there for, and I would say, the ideological interests. If 2 out of 3 or 3 out of 3 things tick the box, they are willing to have an open form of discussion. Remember, this was the case with Morsi as well for a year. Western officials did acknowledge and recognize and engage with the Morsi government. He had a delegation that visited the UK. So the point is, I think the West, we give them way too much kind of omnipotence than they deserve. But it'd be correct to understand that they have their nefarious tentacles of influence involved in so many circles. We simply don't know what deal was made, who was involved in that deal, what role did Iran and Russia play in that deal.
Do you think there was a deal? I think there was. I think there was some kind of negotiations behind the scene where Russia and Bashar agreed to stand down. I don't know what they got in return.
I don't think Bashar was even involved in the deal. That's what I think. I think
maybe,
if there was any deal,
I'm speculating here. Yeah. Maybe Putin did some kind of deal with Trump. I'm not saying it's direct.
That's linked to Ukraine?
That's linked to Ukraine.
Possibly.
We get Ukraine, you can have Syria.
Possibly. So I think in that regard, you can have a balanced approach to that. Because if I spoke to the HTS officials on camera and off camera, and they actually seem quite borderline offended when you say to them that there was a Turkish hand on their part. Now, you can't deny that with the Syrian National Army, who are backed and funded by the Turks. And no doubt there would have been intelligence sharing, there would have been communication, there would have been coordination. And in that case, there definitely was a Turkish hand involved. But in terms of HTS and their in terms of what they are saying, we prepared for 4 or 5 years. We produced domestically produced and manufactured weaponry that simply was just better than what the regime had. We had sleeper cells in different cities and places that then awoke when we activated the operation. Number 4, we've learned from our mistakes. We learned from the mistakes of getting battered by Hezbollah and Iranian militias in certain settings and in certain environments. And number 5, we have also become more unified because the infighting was also a big issue for the Syrian rebels. Now, if you take those 5 things, plus the fact that the Syrian National Army did play a role and they were armed and funded and backed by the Turks. There's no secret in that. So a lot of the things that we're talking about aren't secrets. They're not even secrets. The timing of the operation was not a secret. Who was involved wasn't even a secret. It wasn't even a secret that the Southern Military Command from Daraa was backed by UAE and Jordan, who are more secular elements of the rebel groups. Brothers and sisters and friends, I see that you're enjoying the content. How come you've not clicked subscribe to the 5 Pillars YouTube channel? And if you're watching via Rumble, how come you've not subscribed on our Rumble channel? If you like the content, you like the guests, you like what we're talking about, it's absolutely inexcusable and cheeky for you not to click subscribe. Thank you and Jazakallah khair. What I'm saying is that I think it's more to do with, or at least you can at least give this argument a bit more clout, is that sometimes the West just has to deal with who is in power at that time.
Yeah.
They'll have all the variables to topple, dismantle, weaken and destabilize, which they're doing. They're doing it via sanctions right now, and they're doing it via the Kurdish groups.
You see, what I think will happen is Trump will come into power and he will say to Ahmed Alsharaa and HTS, or they're going to disband HTS now, aren't they?
They are, yes.
He
After
will
the national
say,
conference.
we will lift sanctions from Syria in return for you normalizing with Israel. I think that's the deal that is going to be coming. And that's the deal that we have to, I mean, I know it's not in our power, but the Ummah has to seek to derail.
Absolutely. 1000%.
I'm absolutely, I think the
Don't you find it insulting that that would even be questioned of us?
How of us?
Yes.
Well, we've had a consistent position against any kind of normalization, not just normalization with states, normalization with Zionist groups in the UK or anywhere in the world, sharing bread with Zionists. You know, this has been the consistent position of 5 pillars from day one, and it will remain forever. As long as I'm editor, that's going to be the case.
And we've been criticized by the Jewish Chronicle and other Zionist outlets that have said that the way in which 5 pillars exposes the interfaith sector, especially about a Zionist ploy to basically normalize relations with Muslims, we've been at the forefront of
What
that.
would be your, I mean, I can tell you my attitude towards HTS in Syria. If they normalize with Israel, I'm done. I'm done with them. That would be my attitude.
But what have we done for them? You know, we say we're done with them.
I'm talking about
What have we done
HTS.
for
I'm not
them?
talking about the Syrian people.
Yeah, but,
I'm talking about HTS.
But I think we don't even have to frame it like that. We just have to frame it like we will just carry on doing what needs to be done when there's a key development. If we see signs of normalization, directly, indirectly, even in any meaningful space in years to come, all I am saying is that we have to allow our brothers and sisters in Syria and the leadership, whoever that leadership is now and the makeup of it in the future, time to rebuild and breathe. Because to have an anti-Israel Syria, which is 70% rubble and still half of its population is displaced refugees, what does that solidarity with Palestine and that opposition, that open rhetorical opposition to Israel even mean?
We also have to remember that all the secular states in the region, the Arab dictator states, they've all justified their alliance with Israel or their lack of aggressive posture towards Israel on those basis. We need time to rebuild. We're not in a position to fight, etc., etc. And you can see what path long term these states have gone down is to complete normalization and complete warm relationships with Israel. So as far as I'm concerned, this is still a state that cannot exist. It cannot exist. It cannot exist as an apartheid state in the Middle East. And this has to be our focus as Muslims, however long it takes. Whether it takes my lifetime, my children's lifetime, my grandchildren's lifetime, this is what has to happen. So there can be no legitimacy for Israel whatsoever. That doesn't mean you have to be fighting it. It just means that you cannot give it 1 inch of legitimacy ever.
Inshallah ta'ala, I hope that not just the new Syria, but more Arab countries and Muslim countries in general awake from this. And one of the reasons why we want, not revolutions, but we want these kind of changes in society is that when you realize that the tyranny of oppressors is loosened or removed, Islamic brotherhood and expressions are become more louder. We've seen this in Bangladesh, and inshallah ta'ala we'll see it in Syria. We've clarified our positions. We've clarified what we want to see from the new transitional government in Syria and
I think we've also clarified the nuance within 5 pillars.
Yes.
So we're actually just reporting this down the line. We're not supporting HTS. We're not supporting any faction in Syria. You have a general support for an Islamic Syria and the revolution.
100%.
That's your position.
Unashamedly.
Okay.
I'll say it from the rooftops.
Yeah.
I want to see a Syria which is strong, stable, prosperous, anti-Israel, Islamic, and more in tune to what it has been deprived of for 54 years.
And
that's what I want it to be.
And our editorial policy is just to report what's happening.
That's it.
So if HTS, al-Julani, or whatever, do something good, we will report that. If they do something bad, we'll report that as well. And that's literally it.
And we'll also continue reminding our viewers and listeners that as it stands now, their legal status is that of a prescribed group. And khalas, we move on. It's not that deep. But now I want to just spend a bit of time. Yeah, we've got about 45 minutes.
How long have we been talking?
No, we've been talking for a bit, but we can cover this because the people here that are insignificant, so we won't give them too much time. We've got about an hour. Now, this rumor about how I got to Syria, how I lined up the interview, and why did this happen, and why did you find yourself there, began with an individual called Dan Cohen.
Okay.
Dan Cohen.
Who is he? He's a pro-Palestine activist.
Yeah, an anti-Zionist,
with quite
Jewish,
a large following on Twitter.
On X. And yes, he's done some praiseworthy work for Palestine. Actually, I think he's visited and reported from there. And again, we're not going to take that away from the people that we're now going to.
So he's done a good job in Palestine.
Yeah, but the tactic and the manner in which his mask and the mask of many other white, non-Muslim axis of resistance leftists has been shocking. It has been shocking.
They've come after you and Five Pillars,
specifically,
and me as well to some extent.
So he found that old tweet. He said he's exposed me as a supporter of al-Nusra when I explained that you literally just hashtag what's trending at the time. Fine. And he goes, we demand to know who is it that facilitated and paid for this trip and this meeting with Julani, because you have to be a NATO-approved MI5 asset of some sort. This guy's pathetic in the sense that just 5 days ago, he tweeted, and it'll be on the screen, I'll find the tweet, I'll put it on the screen, that any Palestinian who supported the removal of Bashar al-Assad and the revolution have sold Gaza out. How arrogant do you have to be to tell Palestinians who they should and should not be happy for, including their kin and their brethren of Asham, the Syrians? How dare that you are basically saying that the Gazans that celebrated the removal of Bashar and the toppling of Bashar and the revolution itself, that they have somehow sold out themselves. The fact of the matter is, many of these guys who speak on behalf of Palestine and Palestinians have no mandate to speak on how Palestinians should see the Syrian issue. Besides the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, which is a leftist kind of socialist Palestine faction, most of the faction groups have either been supportive or neutral, but they've been supportive or neutral. The Palestinians celebrated and happy. I don't know of any prominent voice or figure of any ideological leaning that's come out in solidarity with Bashar and super critical of
I think the hearts of the Gazans are with the Syrian people, clearly.
Their hearts,
I think some political figures and others may feel that they're alone now, and that's why they have some reservations, but deep down their hearts are with the Syrian people, not with Bashar al-Assad.
So we have Dan Cohen, who started this. Then we have Tim Anderson. Tim Anderson was a far left, I would say like an anti-far, very extreme far leftist, who spent some years in prison as a part of a murder conspiracy to assassinate a far-right leader in Australia. He was acquitted of that after spending some years in prison. And then not too long after, he was then in prison again for a bomb plot, a terrorism plot in Australia, which again, after appeal, he was acquitted of. This is someone who met Bashar al-Assad in 2013.
So are you saying to him that he should... I mean, he's accused you of being on the payroll, right? So he should clarify whether he's on the
he
payroll.
should absolutely clarify, because I didn't meet...
He's met Bashar al-Assad.
Yeah, I didn't meet no leaders.
So obviously...
You met Bashar al-Assad in 2013, Tim Anderson. Where did you receive any material or financial support whilst you were there, which has made you be so blind to the oppression of Syrians, yet so supportive of the Palestinians? Please do clarify. Same for Dan.
And if you do clarify, Tim Anderson, then we will clarify what you said.
Yes, because to be accusing someone for merely arranging an interview to be an MI5 or CIA asset, it shows how lazy and immature the discourse has become from your end. And that's whether it's Dan Cohen or Tim Anderson or even David Miller. Or Craig Murray, who we're going to be addressing soon as well. So just on this issue of MI5 paid assets, this is from a Muslim perspective, any Muslims, and even, I'll address the Shia here. Because you claim to be from the camp of Imam Hussain radiyallahu an, and to be people of justice and so forth. This is what you claim to be flag bearers of. Many of you know Roshan. Roshan has way more Iranian and Shia friends and associates and peers and colleagues. I'm not sure about how many now. But,
not many.
Yeah, but you've had way more than me.
Historically,
and they know who you are. They know your work. They know your standing. They know your sincerity. And you know what? You can say that X and Y, Z people, their political take on Syria is so problematic that it's detrimental to the wider pro-Palestine liberation cause. You can have that argument. You can even say that these people, Roshan, Dilly, Jalal from Thinking Muslim, MAB, whoever it is, Cage, whoever it is that you want to criticize, that their takes on Syria is that problematic that we feel that it's fulfilling a wider Zionist agenda. You can have that view. You can present that case and articulate in a way which is at least respectful and factual and just, that is not what's been happening.
No.
And that is why we have refused to dance to the rhythm and the tunes of these non-entities who, outside of X, you have to accept who they are. They are non-Muslims. They are lefties. Some of them are over 60, 70 years old, like Scott Ritter, Craig Murray, these guys. Aging men who have a fixation with Syria that not even the Palestinians that they claim to be advocating for have. They don't even have that passion. Some of them have gone beyond what is even acceptable, making takfir on Muslims, in the case of Scott Ritter, in the case of David Miller, who's always enjoyed years of good relations with the Muslim community and whose positions on Syria has been so unhinged of late in terms of his ramblings and the way...
He's calling everyone ISIS.
And everyone is ISIS, Al-Qaeda. Yeah. You were literally being interviewed by the same people for the work that you've done for the Islamophobia, exposing the Islamophobia industry, exposing Zionism and dismantling Zionism, all that work that you've done. Yeah. And Muslims had cordial relations with you for the wider and greater objective, knowing that we are also people who want to see the liberation of Palestine. To switch like that overnight to ISIS head choppers, Al-Qaeda head choppers, this is what you're backing, this is what you're supporting, and this very kind of unhinged, not an articulate presentation of his views.
What do they want him? Bashar ain't coming back. Or if you want to put him back in place, then that means another 10-year civil war. Is that what you want? You want more destruction in Syria?
And also sharing fake news.
To prove your point?
Also sharing fake news. Also sharing videos that they know are either old videos, employing the same tactics as Zionists, using the same language and framings of the war on terror. Framing their criticisms, I'm talking about David Miller here specifically and also Craig Murray, framing their arguments around CVE, around Islamophobia. If you look at the way in which David speaks about anyone who supports the Syrian revolution.
Generalizing about Muslims.
It's generalizing about Muslims. It's textbook Islamophobic tactics used by neocons and Zionists.
Did Craig Murray call you an MI5 agent as well? Or retweeted or something?
He basically tweeted just yesterday or the day before.
Well, he's saying we're shilling. Shilling
MI5 shills. He said MI5
so
shills.
What does that mean? That means we're agents, right?
Yeah, so basically that's what he's saying. Now let's talk a bit about, we've dealt with Dan Cohen, who feels that it's appropriate to tell Palestinians that they've sold out if they support Syria. How dare you? Right. We've spoken about Tim Anderson and his colourful past and his potential links to the Assad regime, considering he visited in 2013. David, I think, is someone who's going through a worrisome phase at the moment. These ramblings won't look good in months and years to come when he realises that Assad is not coming back. And as for Craig Murray, he's another interesting individual because he's still very bitter.
Well, he was a Foreign Office insider.
He was a Foreign Office insider.
So if anyone has links with the establishment,
absolutely,
he's got more links than us.
Absolutely. And let's talk a bit. Let's talk a bit about Craig Murray and where some of his, slanderous lies about 5 pillars or the assertions actually come from. They go back to the general election. They go back to the general election.
I think he's bitter about that,
Yeah, he's so bitter about the fact that he lost to Adnan Hussein, number one. Number two, he's really upset that I got him dropped from that event with Sheikh Asrar. He's burning.
Because he wanted Islamic legitimacy.
Yeah, he wanted Islamic legitimacy. He was sat there in the front line, basically moping and not having it. And I was like, shames.
He threatened to call the police on us, didn't he?
But that's a separate, so I'm going for a list of things. So number one, he lost to Adnan Hussein. Number two, he was dropped from that event with Sheikh Asrar Rashid. Number three, because people were criticizing him on our Facebook page and people were calling him names. He was going to
someone called him a kafir on our Facebook page. Someone we don't even know.
And he was going to report us to police.
And he was going to report us to the police over that.
Yeah, he was going to report.
And then he backtracked later.
Absolutely, that's exactly what he did. And number four, he's also, he went to Beirut and whatever journalism he thought he did there was very sloppy and problematic. So all of these things piling up together shows that Craig Murray is actually someone who appears to be, at least when it comes to dealing with Muslims, has a very problematic approach. Where
I think he has a white savior approach in that he thinks he knows better.
100%.
And he thinks we should do what he tells us to do. And that was the feedback I was getting from Blackburn as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. So he was ready to report 5 pillars to the police because some random person called him names on Facebook. He basically even tweeted that anyone who overtly supports the Syrian revolution and the removal of Bashar should be reported to the police. I'll put the
tweet. Is that what he said?
I will put the tweet up. It's not verbatim, but basically he said that since HTS is a prescribed group and they've led the offensive that's led to the toppling of Bashar, anyone who supports that is supporting terrorism.
So now he wants to shop us to the busies.
Basically. And these receipts will be on screen. So this is who we're dealing with. This is who we're dealing with. We're dealing with 4, 5, 6 horsemen. None of them are Muslim. All of them are white non-Muslims. And this is not us playing the identitarian card. This is us speaking facts, that when we talk about Syria or Al-Aqsa or Jerusalem or the Ummah or its revival, it's coming from a place of deen. So we're not playing the identitarian. We're just saying that look who you're getting your information from. What is their footing and standing in our communities? If we look at some of the individuals here, right? Tim Anderson, going for the names again, Dan Cohen, David Miller, Craig Murray, right? And we've even had an individual like Sulaiman Ahmed, who also has been spending a lot of time unhealthily talking about 5 pillars and our affiliations, made like a 20-post thread, saying... He
said we were getting money from, was it Saudi Arabia and Salafists?
Salafist groups, Zionist agents, and the PINF funding that we received was linked to Zionists and the government itself. Let me just quickly...
That was a COVID fund, which we lost anyway.
So, look, let me just address Sulaiman whilst we're here as well. Sulaiman, I know you're going to listen to this, and these are your career highlights. Look, man, we have a standing and footing in the community, right? Whether you agree with us theologically, politically, we have a standing in the community. You can find out who our friends, our families, our scholars, our advisors, our everything. You just need to go to Bedford.
We're embedded in the community.
Yeah, you just need to go to Bedford. You just need to go to London or Luton. You just need to just go to where we live and reside. And there's a long track record, even amongst people who don't like us per se, that can say they've been here, they're genuine, they're trustworthy, they've done X and Y and Z for the community, may not agree on everything, disagree with this, but these guys are genuine and stand up. And we can trace it back to their scholars, their advisors, their mentors, and the groups that they've worked alongside with. Okay. Now over to you, brother. Akhi, who are you, Habibi? Because it is a tradition within our faith that we ask, who is your man? Meaning, who is your scholar? Who is your teacher? Who is it that vouches from the community if you're going to speak on behalf of the community? Now, just on this issue of journalism and associations, taking clippings of old articles when ISIS was a trending story in 2013 and 14, or my exposure to the Jaman family from Portsmouth during their anti-terrorism case for their support for ISIS, or finding clippings and screenshots of X, Y, and Z is not going to convince a community that we've been serving for longer than 11 years. For longer than 11 years, we've been embedded in the community. There have been times where we've not got things right, but the point is we have the professional credentials and the grassroots community credentials to do what we're doing quite successfully for the years that we have with the permission of Allah. Now, you, on the other hand, there's no track record of Islamic societies, masajid, Muslim organizations, different Islamic groups of movements, community events, local, national, non-Muslim, pro-Palestine groups, anyone ever hosting you, anyone ever knowing you. How dare you believe that this gives you the right to question and cast assertions on a Muslim organization and its editors who have been in the community and been serving them with the permission of Allah for as long as we have and have not always got it right? Akhi, what are your credentials? What are your footing? From what position are you coming from? And also employing the same tactics as Zionists and employing the same strategy as the likes of Douglas Murray, Tommy Robinson, David Atherton, and all these neocon Zionist think tanks in taking clips out of context. In this case, my conversation with Sheikh Haytham and about the establishment of the caliphate in the Muslim majority world, and telling people, oh, Dilly wants to establish a caliphate in the UK. Not even Quilliam resorted to these type of tactics. So I will say to Sulaiman, who's also been a part of this kind of like spreading rumours and slanderous labels, that Yahi, fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you're not the Quilliam 2.0 that I think you may become, or you're showing definite signs of, and there is an ounce of sincerity in you, you know that clarifications were already put out for every single thing that you posted and presented as a lie. So in short, before I hand it back over to you, Roshan, my message to these individuals, and that's what they have been. The individuals are either anti-imperialist lefties or anonymous pro-axis of resistance Shia accounts, mainly anonymous, but in terms of like the guys who have made themselves known, they're not Muslims, so this got nothing to do with being identitarian, but there is an element of whose word do you trust and whose word do you exhaust in investigating and verifying when it's a slander against your Muslim brother. And the Shia, if you consider yourselves to be descriptors of this, then there is also a moral duty on you to be just even with those who you disagree with. I'm talking more about Roshan, not me. I think that your old Shia friends and Press TV colleagues and people that know you, there's a duty on them to say, we think they're way off on Syria. Have any of your Press TV friends or Shia colleagues from the past intervened publicly to say that
Yeah.
that you know what,
Look.
we know them, but this is just wrong.
Okay, so I used to work for Press TV until 2017 or something like that. I don't know. And it's an Iranian-funded channel. And I used to be politically, not religiously, but politically in the resistance camp. Obviously, that's a long time ago now. And also, I have changed my views, both politically and religiously. I've been on a bit of a journey. I'm not quite where you are on Syria,
And you may not ever be.
But I've moved certainly from where I was, 11 years ago. Some people, and I would say that some people in Syria on the rebel side will not forgive me for my past associations with Press TV, and they will never forgive me for that. But all I can say sincerely is that I'm somebody who has changed his views. And I don't renounce every view I ever held. Of course I don't, because that would be insincere as well.
Look, also,
but I'm somebody who has been on a journey. All I see is Dilly's HT and Salafi. Now, you can explain the HT stuff, but you're not Salafi, right?
I have never ever described myself to be a subscriber.
You haven't got the beard for it, for a start.
Yeah, I don't. And there's many things that I do that the brothers from the Salafi Dawah scene have, advised me and, tried correcting me on. But I've never ever claimed to be from that constituency of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Do I believe Salafis to be Sunnis? Yes. Do I believe them to be a part of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah? Yes. Do I believe that their creed and their juristic and jurisprudential takes and their creed is grounded in normative Islam and text? Yes. If that's not enough to be labeling me a Salafist, then quite frankly, that shows your ignorance and your lack of nuance in terms of understanding the broad spectrum of Sunnism that exists amongst the Muslims. HT, this is something that's so old and dated. And a brother from the Side to Side or Side by Side podcast, he asked me quite frankly and scared me, because listen, people say you're HT. I'm like, this is just a lazy argument. HT played as much, or Hizb ut-Tahrir, which is now a banned group in the UK, played as much influence in our politics and dawah as did any other group in the 90s and early 2000s and post 9/11 and post 7/7. If someone is HT because they believe the democratic system of governance is not Islamic, or that they believe voting for a non-Muslim secular party is haram, or that they believe that the caliphate is a better form of governance and that Muslims should, prioritize that in the Muslim majority world, or that the rulers ruling over us don't rule by Islam. If these things make someone HT, then many Muslims are HT. Did HT make these areas of politics and Islam a part of their methodology and campaign calls? Yes. That's why there's a conflation and sometimes people misconstrue it. But people who believe voting is haram, or that democracy is a system of kafar, or that nationalism is haram, that there should be a caliphate in the Muslim world which rules by Sharia. If you believe all those things that somehow you're HT, then quite frankly, so many Muslims are HT then. Yeah. And those views are not limited to this group.
Yeah. Okay. So you're not Salafi.
But again, this is those who are throwing these accusations know what they're doing, Roshan.
Yes.
They know that these groups are being associated to them, especially when they're banned now. It puts a target on your back.
Yeah. This is what I want to talk about.
And ultimately, this is what the leftists, the axis of resistance, that their Islamophobia, their Zionist tactics, their methodologies in now trying to censor, shut down and criminalize certain positions now on Syria is highly problematic. And we need to conclude this discussion by talking about what the future approach will be as a publication.
I want to say something first before we do that.
Go for it.
So what I've noticed on social media, and it's been less intense because I didn't go to Syria like you did, but I've noticed a pile-on from the anti-imperialist left and from resistance axis. In terms of the anti-imperialist left, it's been people with quite prominent accounts with followers.
The people that you mentioned.
Yeah. From the resistance axis, I haven't seen prominent accounts targeting me, but I have seen lots of pro-resistance axis people with smaller followings repeating similar talking points, like it's some kind of coordinated campaign against me, calling me a sellout, calling me a Salafi, ISIS supporter, calling me anti-Palestinian, calling me pro-Zionist, insinuating that I'm taking, and not just me, but Five Pillars, taking money from from MI5, MI6, CIA, Mossad, God knows who else. So now, as you said, I got no problem with people calling me stupid, or people calling me naive, or people saying Dilly's your puppeteer and stuff like that, he's controlling you. I've got no issue with it. It's a legitimate, or that you're even your policy positions are detrimental to the Palestinian cause.
Yeah, you can have those positions.
That's absolutely fine if that's your position. I disagree vehemently with you, but that's absolutely fine. What I object to is people accusing us of being on the payroll, because it is so offensive, so slanderous, such a barefaced lie. It is something without any honor whatsoever. And that is what I object to. And unfortunately, and I'm going to say this as well, is that a lot of the people that you and me know from the anti-imperialist left and from the resistance axis who aren't overtly doing this are staying silent about it. They know it's going on. They know exactly what's happening. They know us personally for many years.
Many years.
They know, they can vouch for us that we are stand-up people that ain't on anyone's payroll. And Five Pillars, quite frankly, will be twice, 3 times, 10 times bigger if we were on somebody's payroll. But we have grown slowly over the years because we have constantly refused state funding. And the insinuation that MI5, these people that have hacked my phone for 11 years, that have caused me no end of grief since I did that documentary in 2013, you know, literally people that are trying to destroy our lives, you know, my life, your life, whatever, to insinuate that we are taking money from these scumbags, and I call them scumbags, you know, because that's what I think they are. These are people that will not take us on in debate. These are people that are trying to destroy our lives, our personal lives, and whatever, you know. And the insinuation is so offensive. And I am frankly offended by the people who know us, who know this is not true, but are allowing this narrative to be amplified and to take hold. They should speak up, and they're too cowardly to do it. And I will remember this. And that's why we have to have a serious discussion about Five Pillars editorial policy going forward. Can we trust these people? You know, should we allow them any airtime whatsoever? Or should we, frankly, just retreat into our Sunni heartlands?
Yeah. So my position has always been, I've not had some of the spheres of company or influence that you've had. I've not had it.
Remind me, but I want to say something else, but go on, yeah.
I've not worked in press TV for as many years as you did. I've done like an internship for like 6 months. Syria kicked off. I didn't complete the internship. Yeah. I don't have Shia friends or people of influence in my life from that leaning. Not because it's entirely by choice per se, but it's because the neighborhood I grew up in, the demographics I grew up with, they're all Sunnis.
You knew a few Shias at school, didn't you?
I had a friend. I have a friend called Shed. Big up to Shed. You know, he's a Pakistani Shia friend of mine. But other than that, all the influence have been entirely Sunni, but a diverse Sunni influence.
Yes.
Tablighi Jamaat, Jamaat-e-Islam, HT in the younger years or the student years. Our brothers from the Salafi Dawah, my local Barelvi Masajid. You know, scholars from that leaning. I've had various Sunni influences. So I've not had this kind of level of, I would say, it's betrayal. For people that have known you, and they've worked with you, and they know your character, and they know your standing. I
consider it betrayal as well.
You know, for them to just be like, you know what? Because, quite frankly, we're that bitter and sore about Syria, we're just gonna let these rumors run amok. Yeah,
it's making me. Or I want to say 2 things. Just allow me a bit of space to say it.
Sure.
So, all those years that I was in the pro-resistance camp, and I was effectively regurgitating Iranian talking points, none of my Sunni brethren and friends abandoned me. They were pissed off at what I was saying. Sorry for that language.
Very angry.
They were annoyed at what I was saying. I know this. They said it behind my back, and they said it to me as well. So I know this. But none of them threw me under the bus simply because they knew me personally. And they knew who I was as a person, and they thought I was misguided, but they knew it was coming from a genuine place. I wasn't doing it because I was being paid to do it or whatever. They knew me as a person. They didn't throw me under the bus. But I feel that, on the other hand, when I went even 10% away from the resistance axis position, not even 100%, but maybe even 10%, then I started to find the social media trolls. Then I started to find the pressure. Then I started to find the, the kind of boycotting. And I just felt that it was like a wake-up call to me. My Sunni friends stood by me when I was saying problematic things for their point of view.
For years.
But my Shia friends didn't.
Yeah.
And they even enabled, I feel, attacks on me.
Absolutely.
And they didn't say anything to defend my honor. And this is a lesson that I've learned and I've internalized.
Look, the whole kind of retreating back to the Sunni heartlands, why do we pretend? I mean, the vast majority of our viewers, listeners, supporters, donors, well-wishers that have been with us from the day one to now are predominantly Sunni. Yeah. We have to accept that. Whatever 5 to 10% readership or even remote support that we would have had from the Shia community, the pro-actors of resistance Shia community, would have been because of you. But the way in which I feel you have been dealt with, because look, calling me MI5 and this and that from non-Muslims, it doesn't matter. I don't care. Wallahi, I am not offended in the slightest.
And we all should say the anti-imperialist left have never given us a penny.
Yes,
as far as to my knowledge, they've never given us a penny. We've just literally given them a platform for Palestine.
That's it.
That's it.
For Palestine.
Or for maybe Islamophobia.
Yes, absolutely. Beyond that, there's been absolutely no kind of like meaningful relationship, let alone one that's material or financial. So the white, yes, I have to highlight the white because this plays a key role in the way in which the demographic of these anti-imperialists are addressing Muslims. Yeah. They all tend to be white, leftist men over the age of 60 telling Muslims how they should be perceiving Syria or not. And this is not identitarian, this is just stating a fact. But staying with the Sunni heartlands, for me, has always just been safer. I have never made takfir of the Shia blanket. I approached them as the same approach of Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, Ahl al-Qibla. Unless you say or do otherwise, then I will make a judgment call, and that you generally apply that to all Muslims. Do I believe that they will liberate Palestine? Absolutely not. Do I believe that Iran is the embodiment of a purist anti-Western state? Absolutely not. They benefited from the regime changes of Iran and Iraq by the US, admitted repeatedly by different presidents. Iran is a pragmatic state that will seek to make certain deals and compromises where it deems it will strengthen its cause. We haven't even touched upon the fact about how compromise and infiltrate their leadership could be. That could have led to Ismail.
Very infiltrated.
Yeah, Ismail Haniyeh. That could have led to the suspicious
Hassan Nasrallah as well.
The suspicious death of Raisi, who some say was an Israeli agent, whereas others were saying he's too hardline. We don't question these things. We don't question Iran's role in the war on terror in terms of how it was hand in glove with the US in Iraq to fight ISIS. That right now, as we speak, Iranian objectives and American objectives to some degree align in Syria. And that is Syria not to be united, to remain destabilized and to find an inroad.
Go on, sorry.
All of those things makes me just feel that the Sunni heartlands that you described is just safer.
I think that, look, I'm also someone who wants to be just. There are some things about Iran's political positions I appreciate and I still appreciate. I think they have, over the years, they have struck an independent posture in the Middle East, which I appreciate, as independent as they are allowed to be. I think also they have done things for Palestine that no Sunni Arab state has done in my lifetime. And
in recent years,
absolutely, and I appreciate that as well. So I don't think we should be totally unjust. I also think the Iraq and Afghanistan thing is more complicated than perhaps you're talking about. I think ultimately hundreds of thousands of American troops either side of Iran's borders was a threat to Iran as well. I tend to think that while there was some working together going on, I tend to think that Iran kind of maneuvered those potentially bad situations into good situations. So it was very much touch and go. It wasn't like they were completely in the pocket of the West working together. I just don't buy that narrative. So I'm saying this because I want to be just. Saying this might even get me a bit of hate from certain quarters, but this is what I believe even now. But I have to say that I do think it's a bit of a cult as well. I think they have leaders that they follow their leaders like they're infallible. And if you step 1 millimeter away from what their leaders say, then they target you and they lie about you. And it's the lying that has really got to me, because ultimately Iran did lie about their power. I think they're heavily infiltrated as well. I think that's obvious to see from the way that Israel has bullied them. I think Hezbollah is very infiltrated as well. It's obvious to see because their leaders were killed with ease. There was human intelligence inside Hezbollah, and there's human intelligence inside Iran. I personally think the leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, is on a more hardline path, and I don't think he's an agent. Yeah, and that's all I have to say. I think that it's really making me reassess my relationships. I think I used to think I had friendships with certain people, but now I'm waking up into thinking that these friendships actually weren't real friendships. They were conditional on political positions. Now, a real friend is someone where you can disagree politically on, and you still maintain a respectful, loving relationship.
And they won't be unjust. They won't be unjust.
And they won't be unjust to you.
Yes.
Yeah, and they won't talk behind your back, and they won't target you behind the back or let others target you. And I feel that I have been personally betrayed, and I feel that those friendships that I used to have in the past actually weren't real friendships. They were political friendships.
And you're saying that, and you've not even experienced the brunt of the pylon. That's been me.
Yeah.
But the reason why I think I've been somewhat nonchalant towards it is because from one segment, being the kind of white leftist tankies, the OAPs, it's like I don't actually care about their opinion.
Nor do I really.
Yeah,
no.
they're
not about Syria. I mean, David Miller, I care about his opinion on Islamophobia and even on Zionism because he's an academic professor. He knows what he's talking about. Where's this expertise on Syria suddenly come from? He's never been there, right?
No, but also the language.
Yeah.
The language is problematic. That because of the works that he's done on Zionism and Islamophobia, it's even more shocking to see the way in which he's speaking to people about it who are pro-revolution. That he's not even making a distinction between those who could genuinely be supporters of ISIS and those who just want freedom and liberation for the Syrians to not live under tyranny.
Craig Murray, if you ever run for parliament again, I will personally use all the resources that I have to ensure that no Muslim votes for you.
Absolutely. And the very fact that a lot of his...
You're over in the Muslim community.
Yeah, that's
Craig
for sure.
Murray.
And the fact that he's still lingering around is funny as well. Scott Ritter, former US Navy SEAL, twice convicted paedophile, is making takfir on Muslims because he believes we supported the Syrian revolution. Can you imagine? We've reached a point in 2025 now where a former US Navy SEAL or Marine Corps guy who's involved in the first Gulf War, twice convicted of paedophilia, is making takfir on Muslims over Syria. That's the stage we've got to, Roshan. I do think the bigger decision actually lies with you and your conscious and your existing and previous relationships. Because as you said, as I mentioned, most of my surroundings doesn't really involve people from the anti-imperialist left or the Shia axis of resistance. I don't really have many people who have had relations. So this is a call that you're going to have to make. And we can't ignore news, of course, but there's stories to cover. It's not going to be like a boycott of news. We cover news as it happens. But in terms of like platform, collaborations, warm engagement, help disseminating campaigns, that's something you're going to have to make a call on. Me personally...
Why would we engage with people who think we're MI5 agents?
Yeah, I can't,
or who are allowing that narrative to take hold.
Look, if it wouldn't have been seen as something that was childish, or if there wasn't a wider benefit to it, I would delete every single podcast and video and engagement that we did. But I'm not going to do it.
I think history is important. I think history as it is important to be documented. So absolutely. I don't intend to do that.
Yeah, but I'm just saying that it's a decision that you're going to have to make. I am definitely, gravitate towards, we will remember this period. We'll remember this period where over Syria, the dirty tactics that people resorted to just because they couldn't get over the fact that their favourite Arab secular dictator was overthrown.
It's a political disagreement.
It's a political disagreement, man. SubhanAllah. And I'm not even addressing the non-Muslims here. Yeah. I'm not even addressing the non-Muslim lefties here. I'm addressing Muslims now. That if over Syria, you are willing to even entertain such lies and rumours or help spread them or defend us in our absence, this brings into question how you see Islam and al-wala wal-bara, your loyalty to Islam and Muslims and the Ummah. Because if you're going to allow non-entities who aren't even Muslim to spread rumours, or in the case of someone like Sulaiman Ahmed, who has absolutely no footing or standing in the community, and is actually showing more signs of potentially being a future Quiliamite, it's not something which is actually good. We position ourselves, and I'm wrapping up, we position ourselves, and 5 Pillars always has, as khidmah to the community. We are servants of the community, And when there is an issue where we have to take a strong stance on, we do for the betterment of the community. And where a particular matter is sensitive, it requires far more caution when approaching it. And Syria is one of those issues. We have our strong positions, but the things that we've been accused of by some of the people
Unjust.
who is just unjust,
Just unjust.
slanderous, libelous, and laughable. It's actually laughable.
It's not, and it's going to be their loss, not ours. You know,
100%.
because we don't need them really.
Wallahi, we don't.
We're only covering them because we're fair people, and also
Alhamdulillah.
we're interested in news which is relevant to the Muslim community. But not one of them donates to us.
All these organizations,
Yeah.
they have no bearing on us.
Also, the Shia community, or the Shia Muslim community, who have they got as a voice for their affairs?
Naqshbani.
Muslim vibe.
So they're
It's
finished.
dead.
Yeah,
They're finished.
They're finished.
You know,
They were done.
and it's them.
And those who know us and those who know how journalism operates know that there is absolutely nothing of question or untowards from the perspective of 5 pillars. I will say to those non-Muslim allies who have taken strong stances on Syria that you need us way more than we've ever needed you. The Muslims will carry on. Of whatever theological or political leanings or persuasions they come from, we just carry on because we have established institutions, we have established grassroots organizations, we have movements and traditions that preserve our communities, and that's something you simply don't have. You don't have the mobilization ability, you don't have the organizational, the financial capacity of the Muslim communities and all its various leanings and stripes. So I would caution you guys to be a bit more tempered on Syria, because it's one of those areas and one of those things which, if you're going to burn those bridges and they remain permanent, it's going to be more detrimental to you than it would be to 5 pillars. And on this note, I hand it over to you for any concluding words and I'll wrap up.
No, I think I've said what I want to say. I'm just, you know, obviously Syria has brought up this fitna online, which is exhausting at times and vicious. And the amount of lies and fabrications and slander has shocked me, because I thought people had more honor. You know, I thought people would play the man, not the, you know, the ball, not the man.
Yep.
And they would come at me because I expected them to come at me because of my political views. I didn't expect them to insinuate that I was an MI5 agent or CIA or Mossad, and to allow
It's
that.
so jokes.
And it's frankly insulting, and it's not something it's not something I take lightly, and it's not something I'm gonna forget. And I think you're right. We just retrench into our Sunni heartlands. I think people watching this, our own supporters,
They already know
will laugh at these accusations.
Of course they will.
And if the anti-imperialist left and if the Axis Resistance Shia want to alienate Sunni Muslims, they're doing a very good job of doing
They're doing a fantastic job.
Yeah.
In fact, if some of the accusations and rumors are true about me specifically, then what you're actually doing is you're fulfilling that very agenda. In that Roshan was always consistently more open to having more cordial relations between the two groups, even in terms of like shared interests, even inclusion. You were
Now
far
I'm more militant than you.
Yeah, you've been
I'm the
far
one
more open
sending
to
you
those
angry
ideas.
voice notes.
I have merely always said coexistence is the best we could ever have, and that I don't ping or hinge the revival of the Muslim Ummah, or predominantly the Sunni Muslim Ummah, with any relevance to the Shia. So I feel for you, Roshan, more than me. Because I've had a huge support base from the Sunnis over Syria, over Bangladesh, over Afghanistan. Alhamdulillah, they've shown that there's been consistency. I think the whole kind of betrayal and the letdown is something that you have to ponder upon, and inshallah ta'ala, a lesson that we should learn from. That some of the friends and allies of yesterday and yesteryear have actually turned out to be
Not real friends.
not real friends, and not good faith actors. And on that note, I hope we can close this chapter on Syria, continue covering it as it may, taking
I
whatever.
don't think we need to say anything else publicly.
That's it, khalas. Yani,
We've said everything.
And just to kind of like, oh no, this is my concluding note, is that we've chosen our platform and our terms to respond to these points. We are not going to dance to the rhythm and the tunes of anonymous accounts or people who have no sway or say in our community.
And I'm not going to get into Twitter wars with anybody as well.
it's boring
I don't have the
stuff
time. I'm running a serious organization here, you know?
with families.
I do not have time for that.
Many of us have families.
Yeah.
We have children,
We all have,
right?
yeah.
We have extended families. Again, something which the anti-imperialist left may not enjoy, sadly, due to such such zealous takes on leftist politics.
Yeah.
But anyway, on that note, brothers and sisters, Jazakallah khair for tuning into this New Year's Day, New Year's Gregorian year podcast where I dragged Roshan out and Shalwar Kameez to talk about Syria, to talk about the future of the region. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that whatever comes from Syria and Bilad al-Sham is promising and hopeful and beneficial to Islam and Muslims. Ameen. And we pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that all the nefarious agendas and the evildoers and their plans to desecrate and dishonor Masjid al-Aqsa and the blessed land of Bilad al-Sham, that their plans are destroyed. Ameen ya Rab. And on that note, brothers and sisters, like this video, leave a comment, share it. You can find it on all major audio platforms. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.